Hi, PerspectiveWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Friday, September 13th. In fact, Friday the 13th with a full moon. That's quite rare indeed. About 1% of the time on a Friday the 13th there is a full moon. And I've seen this morning, don't quote me on this, but this happens to be even rarer than that in the sense that this full moon on a Friday the 13th is occurring when the moon is at the farthest point in its orbit, the apogee. Apparently that hasn't happened since 1832 and won't happen again for another 500 years. Again, that's a full moon on a Friday the 13th when the moon is at its farthest point in the orbit, otherwise called an apogee. Well, indeed, we have a very tropical, active tropical scene right now with 4 or 5 different areas to monitor. Of course, we had Hurricane Dorian, a very noteworthy storm that reached Category 5 status, and many times in an active tropical season, if you have one noteworthy system, it's often followed up by a second one. Last year, for example, we had Hurricane Florence, which caused tremendous amount of flooding in the coastal part of the Carolinas. Then later in the tropical season, we had Hurricane Michael, which came ashore as a Cat 4 in the panhandle of Florida. Later, that was actually recategorized as a Cat 5 upon landfall. But again, 2 noteworthy systems last tropical season, and we've had one so far this year as Dorian reached Cat 5 status, and we'll see if we get a follow-up type, a noteworthy system this tropical season. Again, 4 or 5 different areas to monitor over the next several days. Let's take a look at an infrared satellite image extending from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the eastern Atlantic. This comes from the University of Wisconsin CIMSS Tropical Cyclone Site. First of all, most noteworthy and most concerning in the near term is this area right here over the Bahamas. This is the last thing that the Bahamas need right now, more gusty winds and heavy rainfall, but that is indeed what's on the table over the next 24 to 48 hours or so. This system is not yet named. If indeed it becomes a named tropical storm, which could happen later today or tonight or certainly by tomorrow, it would be named Humberto. The next one would be Imelda. And this one will continue to slowly move to the north and west towards the east coast of Florida. Where have we heard that before? Well, it was with Hurricane Dorian. Looks like once it gets right around to the coastal sections of the upper half of Florida, the upper eastern half of Florida, it'll start to turn around and likely turn to the north and east in this fashion right here. Now, that may not be the end of the story. Once it gets to this position right here, there will be a very strong high pressure system over southeastern Canada. We'll have to see if that goes out to sea or actually begins to make a left turn towards the east coast. Another area, here's a batch of showers and thunderstorms of interest here because it very well could organize into a tropical type of disturbance as it moves west across the Gulf of Mexico. Yet another impressive wave right here all the way in the eastern Atlantic. That looks like that will continue to move across the central Atlantic and probably reach the eastern part of the Caribbean Sea in about 4 or 5 days or so, and it will have to be closely monitored at that point in time. And yet another wave exists far eastern Atlantic just off the west coast of Africa. And over the last several days we've shown a lot of activity over the continent of Africa. Those are the breeding grounds for tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin. As long as it remains active over Africa, it'll likely remain active in the tropical Atlantic. Well, here's the official positioning by the National Hurricane Center. They're based in Miami, Florida. And they have 3 different systems on the map right here. But again, I'm monitoring closely that one over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, not shown right here. That very well could turn into kind of a more organized tropical type of wave. But here is the most immediate concern right here over the Bahamas. It very well could become tropical storm Humberto over the next 12 to 24 hours or so. It's moving northwest at 6 miles per hour right now. Very slow movement indeed. Could actually reach the eastern coast of Florida or come awfully close before It looks like it'll probably make a turn to the north and then northeast and move in this fashion right here. In a moment, we'll take a look at a compilation of computer forecasts, the tracks for this particular system. Meanwhile, the front running wave here in the eastern Atlantic looks like it'll hold together and push generally in a westward direction over the next 5 to 7 days or so, and probably reaching the Caribbean Sea, the eastern part of the Caribbean Sea, 5 to 7 days or so, and it'll have to be closely monitored at that point in time. Yet another tropical wave has just moved off the west coast of Africa over the past day or so. Well, here's a compilation of some computer forecast model storm tracks for this particular system. Right now it's referred to as Tropical Disturbance 9. Again, it could become a tropical storm Umberto over the next 12 to 24 hours or so. Generally in agreement that it moves northwest over the next 12 to 24 hours or so. Now, whether it makes it all the way to the east coast of Florida, still that certainly is a question, but once there, it looks like it'll take a turn to the north and east, and we'll look at some of the reasons why that is likely to occur. Still a couple of models have it going into the Gulf of Mexico. Probably that's not going to happen, but again, there was an area of showers and thunderstorms right now in the eastern Gulf of Mexico that will have to be watched as it moves slowly to the west. Now, once it moves to the north and east, not necessarily an out-to-sea solution. We'll have to monitor it once it's in this position right here. Again, there are some signs that it could end up taking a turn to the north and west because of building high pressure over southeastern Canada. That, of course, would be a big concern for the eastern seaboard, and we'll monitor that threat, of course, over the next couple of days. We'll talk about some of the reasons why that's on the table over the next couple of minutes. Well, let's take a look at the current surface map across the U.S. before we take a look at some forecast maps. Cool frontal system dropped southward in the overnight hours, basically kind of a backdoor cool front. Very strong high pressure over southeastern Canada. Remember, we've talked extensively about when there's strong high pressure over southeastern Canada this time of the year, watch out in the Bahamas, in the southeastern part of the U.S., the Gulf of Mexico, because tropical systems can very well slip underneath that ridge, move from the east to the west. Indeed, that is what is on the table right now. We have this tropical system over the Bahamas. Very well could become a tropical storm over the next 12 to 24 hours or so as it slides underneath that ridge towards the east coast of Florida. Much, much cooler air has pushed into the D.C., Philadelphia, New York City corridor in the overnight hours. Stiff northeast winds today with this strong high pressure to the north, kind of like a cold air damming situation in the wintertime that many northeasterners are familiar with. And we'll have high temperatures this afternoon much closer to the 70-degree mark than the 85 to 90, even 95 degrees that were experienced yesterday in the I-95 corridor. Well, let's take a look at the forecast maps from last night, GFS operational run at 6Z, and we're looking at 500 millibar height anomalies to kind of get a handle on some of the factors involved with the eventual movement of this tropical system over the Bahamas. First of all, strong high pressure ridging exists this morning over the eastern part of the U.S. Again, we have this tropical wave over the Bahamas this morning. Let's take a look at what happens here over the next couple of days. First of all, that high pressure ridging slides a little bit to the east, and then by Saturday morning, situated over the western Atlantic. Meanwhile, we'll have that tropical system over the Bahamas slipping to the north and west at a slow amount. But then take a look at what happens by Sunday morning. That shifts farther to the east. The tropical system by this time will be very close to the east coast of Florida, if not over the eastern seaboard of Florida here. And we'll see this ridge start to weaken here. And here we go. We get into a situation by the end of the weekend where this tropical system will be in an area of kind of weakening high pressure ridging. And as we saw with Hurricane Dorian, that can cause a slowdown. It can result in a gradual turning of the tropical system. And indeed, that what is likely to happen here This system will continue on a northwest track for the next 24 to 48 hours or so at a slow pace, and then begin a turnaround when that high pressure ridging weakens over the southeastern U.S. coastline, and it'll start to turn to the north and east, and it could, and hopefully this point here on Monday, it starts to turn to move out to sea. It'll certainly head in that direction for a while, but what is a little bit concerning, and we'll have to monitor this, is as we get into the middle part of next week, look at all this high pressure ridging here over the northern Great Lakes and heading into southeastern Canada. If that storm manages to slow down enough and doesn't get picked up by this trough, this ridge could start to have an influence on it. Maybe it'll cause it to turn to the north and west before it actually gets a chance to go out to sea. That's just something we'll have to monitor over the next several days again. But with high pressure ridging building into southeastern Canada the middle part of next week, we have to hope that this trough pulls this system out to sea. That could happen, certainly could happen, but cannot write off the possibility that it'll start to turn to the north and east and then slow down and maybe make a turn to the north and west. Just something we'll have to monitor over the next several days. Well, let's wrap up with a look at the operational version of the GFS surface forecast maps here from the 6E run. Strong high pressure over southeastern Canada. Here's a reflection of the low pressure at the surface. It's tropical wave. Again, it could become tropical storm Umberto over the next 24 hours or so. Stiff northeast breeze in D.C., Philadelphia, even New York City all day today. Lots of clouds, especially from Philly on south to D.C. New York City certainly will experience some sunshine, but much cooler conditions compared to yesterday. It was well up in the 90s in D.C., upper 80s to lower 90s in the Philly metro region on Thursday afternoon, much closer to the 70-degree mark in all areas of the I-95 corridor during the day today, with lots of clouds, again, especially from Philly on south, and a stiff northeast breeze. Let's now push ahead here, and the GFS has a reflection of that system near right here near the east coast of Florida by the late part of the weekend. Again, by this time it could very well be a tropical storm Umberto. Certainly likely to get locally heavy rain, gusty winds in the Bahamas over much of Florida over the next 48 hours or so as this system rides up to the north and west. Again, it looks like it'll slow down and then start to make a turn to the north and east by early next week. Here we go. Much the same track that Hurricane Dorian took, right near the east coast of Florida, or in this case it might be right over it, and then right along the southeastern U.S. coast on its way to the north and east. Dorian moved over the Outer Banks and then pretty much out to sea, at least in terms of its relationship to the Mid-Atlantic region. It certainly had an impact, a big impact on Nova Scotia on its way to the north and east. And this system as well could turn out to sea. Let's hope it does. But again, a little bit of a concern here that out in this region right here, high pressure will build by the middle of next week into the New England area or southeastern Canada, and it very well could result in at least a beginning of a turn to the left here by this system. And of course, we'll have to closely monitor that over the next several days. But that's it for now. Here we are at the climatological peak of the tropical season in the Atlantic Basin, and numerous waves to monitor over the next several days. That's it for now. For PerspectiveWeather.com, I'm meteorologist